Hi, this is the AI Storyteller. I'm Mark. The book I'm introducing to you in this issue is called 100 Years of Solitude. This book is undoubtedly famous, and even if many people haven't read it, they have definitely heard of it. 100 Years of Solitude was written by Colombian author Gabriel García Márquez. Márquez was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature and is considered the uncontested winner. However, the reputation of 100 Years of Solitude among readers is polarized. Some people think the book is excellent, while others find it difficult to get through. Personally, I think one reason for the difficulty in reading is because the writing style of this book is completely different from the novels most people are accustomed to. The book doesn't have a linear story from beginning to end, nor does it have a main character, and it's even hard to pinpoint a specific theme. In this book, as one story is about to end, another one immediately begins, and simultaneously, there are stories nested within stories. Each story has its own protagonist, and each protagonist has a rich personality. There are intricate relationships between characters, not to mention the long sentences that Márquez likes to use and the magical realism style. In this issue's analysis, I will first briefly introduce the author, Gabriel García Márquez, and the writing process of this book. Then, I will use several typical characters from the book to give you an overview of its content. Finally, I will help you gain a deeper understanding of 100 Years of Solitude through a few key concepts. Part 1. Alright, first let's take a look at who Gabriel García Márquez was and the circumstances under which he wrote 100 Years of Solitude. No writer starts off as a writer, able to sustain themselves solely through writing. Many writers originally had other plans in life but were called to become writers. Márquez published an autobiography where he begins by telling his mother that he won't follow the family's plan of studying law in college and becoming a lawyer to live a middle-class life. He wanted to be a writer. As a stepping stone, he first entered the field of journalism. Márquez worked as a journalist in the capital of Colombia and was later sent by newspapers to be a foreign correspondent in Europe. However, like many journalists aspiring to become writers, Márquez faced two problems. The first problem was poverty. Márquez once jokingly said that after the publication of 100 Years of Solitude, he gained many friends, but no one knew that he had been so poor that he had to search for food in trash cans in Paris. The second problem was that he felt journalism was depleting him, but he couldn't immediately achieve literary success. One day, when Márquez returned home in the evening, his wife told him that they had no money left to buy food, so they couldn't afford to buy milk for their 2-year-old son. What followed was a scene where Márquez sat down with his son in his arms and earnestly explained to him why there was no milk that day. He swore to his son that such a situation would never happen again. The biographer of Márquez describes his state of mind at the time as follows: even if he himself was accustomed to hunger, his wife and children needed to eat. He prepared himself, gritting his teeth, to bid farewell to literature. However, a benefactor soon appeared in Márquez's life. This person's name was Carmen Balcells. In 1962, she became Márquez's literary agent. Don't underestimate this woman. Carmen can be considered the most famous literary agent in the entire Spanish-language literary world. Carmen started arranging for the publication of Márquez's novels and even sold some of his previous works to publishers in New York, even though it was difficult to find publishers for his works in his native language at the time. In 1967, 100 Years of Solitude was published and became one of the best-selling books of all time. I looked it up, and it is said to have sold over 50 million copies worldwide. For a writer, a book like this holds significance that goes beyond achieving financial freedom and the ability to write whatever they want. Its greater significance lies in the fact that writing such a book can be considered a lifelong pursuit for a writer and something that is rare and elusive. During the Latin American literary boom of that era, a group of immensely talented writers emerged. It included masterful figures such as Márquez from Colombia, Loza from Peru, Fuentes from Mexico, Cortázar from Argentina, and Carpentier from Cuba. Among these masters, Márquez stood out as exceptional because he wrote 100 Years of Solitude. The writing process of 100 Years of Solitude has since been mythologized. According to the public account, while driving back home with his family from Mexico, not long into the journey, the first sentence of the novel came to his mind. Following that sentence, though unseen, it was clear that the entire novel seemed to be directly dictated from the heavens. Powerful and irresistible, like magic. When Márquez finally finished writing 100 Years of Solitude, it was 11 o'clock on a morning. Márquez recalls that he was alone at home, and he tried to call a friend to share the news but couldn't find anyone. He then fell into a state of confusion, having been occupied for years with a single task and suddenly not knowing what to do next. At that moment, he saw a blue cat enter the room, and Márquez thought to himself, maybe this book will sell well. Later, in a letter to his friend Montoya, Márquez wrote, "For so many years, I have worked like an animal, exhausted every day. I don't know what my future holds, only that I love novels. But I also know that writing novels cannot sustain me. Indeed, even the creators themselves are unsure of the fate that awaits their creations. Even after completing a work destined to be widely acclaimed and a future classic, writers still grapple with intense self-doubt." Returning to 100 Years of Solitude, there are numerous interpretations of this book. One interpretation links it to the political situation in Colombia and Latin America. Of course, this interpretation is not without merit. Latin American history is indeed filled with poignant stories intertwined with colonial rule, post-colonial dictatorships, and the so-called new colonization after global trade globalization. However, if we only view 100 Years of Solitude through this lens, we underestimate the book. The global success and the reading frenzy it sparked in an era where literature was no longer mainstream are due to its universality that surpasses any specific nation or country. Renowned literary critic Bloom once said that 100 Years of Solitude is not just the story of a particular nation, but the story of all humanity. Márquez himself has responded to critics who found some of the plot lines in his novel too absurd. For instance, there is a scene where a girl hanging clothes on a rooftop suddenly flies into the sky. However, he often received letters from people around the world who had never been to Colombia, expressing astonishment and telling him that the stories he wrote in his book felt as if they were happening right beside them. Part 2. Now let's take a closer look at what this book is about. As we mentioned earlier, this book doesn't have a complete, linear story or a single protagonist. If we must summarize, it tells the rise and fall of a family spanning 7 generations. Each character introduced in the book has their own distinct image and storyline. It can be said that as time progresses, the focus shifts among the different protagonists. In this novel, the author sets the time frame as 100 years. Not precisely 100 years, but rather the duration it takes for a family to complete a cycle of rise and decline. Corresponding to this 100-year time frame, the novel also establishes a spatial framework. All the stories in the novel take place in a small town called Macondo. Borrowing the concept from the popular Marvel universe, Márquez creates a Macondo universe. The main characters in the novel belong to a family called the Buendia family. Macondo, as a place, is founded by the Buendia family and ultimately meets its demise with the death of the last family member. The fate of this family spanning 7 generations is the story that the book aims to tell. In the novel, the destiny of this family has already been written. There is a gypsy magician who appears in the book, and he has a deep connection with the Buendia family. He leaves behind a scroll written on parchment that clearly records the history of this family. However, even with the parchment in their possession, the family members are unaware of their future destiny because the scroll is written in Sanskrit and needs to be deciphered. Some members of the family were naturally interested in the parchment scroll. One male member of the 6th generation spent a considerable amount of time deciphering it. However, the act of deciphering the scroll was synchronous with the progression of the family's destiny. The events recorded on the scroll had already occurred and could not be changed. Now I will select a few family members to try and connect the story of this family. I will categorize them as the pioneer, the power seeker, the hedonist, and the contemplative. These 4 personality types alternate among the family members. The 4 individuals I have chosen represent the most typical manifestations within the family. There is a sentence on the parchment scroll that encapsulates the fate of the family. The first person in the family is tied to a tree, and the last person is being devoured by ants. The first person in the family is the pioneer, the founder of Macondo. He married his cousin, which brought about a fear, the belief that marrying close relatives would result in a child born with a pig's tail. In the family's history, there had been a similar occurrence before, where a child with a pig's tail was born as a result of marrying close relatives. This individual with a pig's tail remained single throughout his life because he refused to let any woman see his tail. Eventually, a friend who was a butcher helped him cut off his tail. Unfortunately, he died due to excessive bleeding. After getting married, fearing a repetition of history, the pioneer and his wife refrained from sexual relations for a long time. The pioneer was passionate about cockfighting and excelled in it, which may have served as an outlet for his excess energy. However, a turning point occurred during a cockfight. One day, the pioneer won against his opponent in a cockfight but was mocked by his adversary, who claimed that everyone knew he wasn't a man and was incapable in that regard. Enraged, the pioneer used his spear to puncture his opponent's throat during a duel, killing him. Subsequently, to avoid further ridicule and even if it meant having a child with a pig's tail, he engaged in relations with his wife. However, the spirit of the deceased opponent haunted the family. Every night, he would wander through the house in agony, seeking clean water to cleanse his throat wound. The pioneer's wife was compassionate and placed various containers filled with water in the house. But in the end, the pioneer could no longer bear it and decided to leave the village where they lived, going as far as possible and never returning. That was how Macondo came to be founded. Later on, they were very relieved that their 2 sons and 1 daughter were born healthy. To be precise, none of them had pigtails. The pioneer was a highly capable individual. He meticulously arranged the positions of each house and was filled with curiosity and a desire for exploration towards all things unknown. For instance, he once attempted to create weapons using a magnifying glass and also studied alchemy. He was a close friend of the gypsy magician mentioned earlier. However, in the latter half of his life, the pioneer became completely absorbed in his own world. Time had come to a standstill for him, and every day felt like Monday. In order to break free from this stagnation, he removed the bolts from the doors and prepared to destroy everything in the house. There was no other choice but for his son to seek help from the neighbors, and it took dozens of people to subdue him and tie him to a tree in the yard. He began speaking in an incomprehensible language, able to converse with the dead but unable to recognize his own family. To prevent him from going insane again, he remained tied to the tree with a canopy overhead, and someone would bring him food at mealtime. He remained in this state until his death. The power seeker was a prominent figure among the second generation of the family. The first sentence of 100 Years of Solitude states, many years later, facing the firing squad, Colonel Aureliano Buendia would remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. Colonel Aureliano Buendia is the power seeker. He was the leader of the Revolutionary Army and ignited a nationwide war, with the potential to overthrow the government and become the ruler. From now on, we will refer to him as the Colonel. The Colonel was the most accomplished individual in the family. According to Márquez's narrative, the Colonel led 32 armed uprisings, survived 14 assassination attempts, 73 ambushes, and 1 execution by firing squad. He was injured only once, in a failed suicide attempt. In his youth, the Colonel was an idealist. Why did he launch the uprising? It was because he witnessed the government's deceitful actions during elections, despite his father being a government official. However, he despised the opposition's senseless killings. Initially, he even displayed a certain detachment from power. This was evident in his insistence on being referred to as Colonel, despite having the authority to call himself anything else. Nevertheless, power eventually consumed the Colonel. The power seeker himself was changed by power. In the process of this legendary soldier's relentless pursuit of power, Márquez used some intriguing details to illustrate the impact of power on him. For instance, his closest comrade, feeling the futility of war, typed a line in their routine telegram conversation: "Aureliano, it's raining in Macondo." The colonel remained silent for a moment and replied, "Don't mess around, it's normal for it to rain in August." He disregarded the emotions conveyed by his revolutionary comrades. Yet, he was originally an extremely sensitive person. During the peak of the colonel's military career, Márquez wrote, his orders were always carried out even before being issued, and they were executed to a greater extent than he had ever dared to imagine. He wielded great power but found himself lost in solitude, beginning to lose direction. The cheers of the people in the occupied towns disgusted him because they had once cheered for his enemies as well. When the colonel decided to execute his opponent, who he secretly admired, he said, "It's not me who wants to execute you. It's the revolution that wants to execute you." His opponent retorted, "Go to hell, old friend," and then delivered a classic line, "What worries me is that you, who hated the military so much, fought against them for so long, pondered them for so long, have ultimately become just like them. No ideal in this world is worth sinking into such degradation." Meanwhile, the colonel grew tired of the fickleness of war, trapped in the vicious cycle of this endless conflict, always spinning in place, only getting older, more decayed, more uncertain about why to fight, how to fight, and when to fight. It was failure that saved him and pulled him out of this cycle of stagnant war. The colonel eventually decided to end the war and negotiate with the government. Moreover, he made a firm determination to relinquish all power and glory. He refused to accept the president's decoration and did not participate in any government ceremonies honoring him. Some criticized him, claiming that he had negotiated with the government for money. However, his failed suicide attempt dispelled all such criticisms. He gained tremendous popularity among the public. However, the colonel refused to appear in public and become a public figure. For the rest of his life, he stayed in the alchemical laboratory left by his father, turning gold into small gold fishes. Initially, he would sell them and then recast the gold he received back into small fishes. Later on, he would simply melt them again and repeat the process endlessly. He continued until his death. The third generation of the family had a minor dictator. While the colonel was away on expeditions, fighting guerrilla warfare throughout the country, this minor dictator became the ruler of Macondo. The minor dictator turned into a despised tyrant. The final outcome was his execution by government forces. The third generation of the family was a transitional generation. They were the sacrifices of their father's achievements. The government retaliated against them out of fear for the colonel. As a result, all male members of the third generation of the family died tragic deaths. The sensualist was a representative figure of the fourth generation of the family, and one of the twins. In his youth, his twin brother was a playboy. He followed his brother and discovered one of his brother's lovers. Initially, this lover mistook the sensualist for his brother. However, she later fell in love with the sensualist and became his lover. His lover possessed a magical power that enabled rapid reproduction among livestock, including cows. They started with rabbits, and overnight the yard was filled with rabbits. Then they exchanged the rabbits for a cow, and 2 months later, the cow gave birth to triplets. The cows continued to reproduce without any human intervention. The sensualist prospered greatly as a result. To what extent? The book mentions a detail where one morning, the sensualist, feeling inspired, took a box of money and a jar of paste and, humming a tune, covered every inch of his large house, inside and out, with money. He then announced, "From now on, I hope no one in this household ever mentions money to me again." The sensualist did not marry his lover. He married another woman, a woman from outside the town of Macondo. She came from a fallen noble family, and had been raised as a queen since childhood. She was brought to the town to participate in the carnival parade. Due to her beauty, she became the beauty queen of the carnival. It was during this time that the sensualist fell in love with her at first sight. However, although the sensualist married the beauty queen, he still felt more comfortable living with his lover. Initially, he spent his days at his lover's house, and later on, he stopped coming home at night altogether. He only returned home to his family during significant moments. The sensualist indulged in lavish feasts. Every day at 11 o'clock, a truck would arrive, delivering champagne and brandy to him. On his way home from the station with the alcohol, if he encountered people and felt pleased, regardless of whether he knew them or not, he would invite them to join the festive banquet. After all, his ever-multiplying livestock brought him inexhaustible wealth. His feasts attracted idlers and gluttons from the entire region. He himself was also a glutton. He would host eating contests at home, and more often than not, he would emerge as the victor. This turned him into a big fat man. Ironically, the sensualist ended up dying of hunger. After 4 years, 11 months, and 2 days of continuous heavy rain in Macondo, the livestock began to die. His lover also lost her ability to make the animals reproduce. He began to grow poor. His throat became afflicted, as if a pair of large pincers were gripping his throat, making it difficult for him to eat, or even speak. From the generation of the sensualist onward, the fate of the family started to decline. The sensualist had a daughter who fell in love with a worker. However, her mother, the sensualist's wife, believed that their social statuses did not match and could not accept the relationship. It was a tragic story. Whenever the worker appeared, there would be a swarm of yellow butterflies nearby. He would sneak into the bathroom from the rooftop at night to meet his lover. When the mother discovered this, she informed the mayor that a chicken thief had appeared in their house and requested soldiers to be stationed in the yard. She instructed them to shoot if they saw anyone on the roof. The worker was shot and left with a permanent disability, but for the rest of his life, he remained silent about his love, allowing people to view him as a mere chicken thief. The sensualist's daughter was sent to a convent where her mother had once stayed in her youth. There she lived out her old age in loneliness. Only an illegitimate child was sent back. It can be said that this couple, after a brief passion, lived the rest of their lives in profound solitude. This illegitimate child is the pensive one. The pensive one is the only male of the 6th generation in the family, and the one who ultimately deciphered the parchment scroll left by the gypsy magician, which recorded the destiny of the family. When the pensive one was young, he was confined to his home and not allowed to go outside. His grandmother feared that the existence of an illegitimate child would be discovered. Ironically, the powerful ones, including the colonel who initiated the war, aimed to fight for the legal rights of illegitimate children. Furthermore, the family had previously accepted illegitimate children without hesitation. Nevertheless, the pensive one did not feel lonely. The ghost of the magician would converse with him, revealing the family's past and guiding him on how to decipher the parchment scroll. Later, as the members of the family died one by one, no one paid him any attention. The pensive one would often leave home and go to the bookstore in town to read books, searching for references that could help him decipher the parchment scroll. The pensive one was more like a scholar and the heir to the magician. However, he could not escape the fate of the family, and would always fall in love with the wrong person. When a woman from the 5th generation of the family, who happened to be the pensive one's aunt, returned to Macondo from Europe, his own destiny and that of the entire family began to approach its end. The pensive one fell in love with his own aunt. The curse that the pioneer and his wife feared finally came true. Love blossomed between the 5th generation woman and the 6th generation man in the family, and they got married. They then gave birth to a son who had a pig's tail. Tragically, the mother died from excessive postpartum bleeding. Overwhelmed with grief, the father left the house to seek solace with his friends and neglected to take care of the baby. The infant was carried away and devoured by a swarm of ants. The first person in the family was tied to a tree, and the last one is being devoured by ants. All the words written on the parchment scroll were fulfilled. The pensive one returned home and, in immense sorrow, picked up the parchment scroll once again. He realized that he was living out the events described in the scroll. Determined to uncover the next set of destinies, he continued deciphering. However, after the pensive one deciphered the entire parchment scroll, the fate of Macondo and the family not only unfolded on paper but also reached its conclusion in reality. A hurricane, unlike any other seen before, wiped Macondo off the face of the earth. At this point, the 4 archetypal characters in the book, the pioneer, the powerful one, the hedonist, and the pensive one, have been introduced. It's worth noting that these four characterizations are just a part of the richly crafted characters depicted by Márquez. Part 3. As mentioned before, the characteristics of pioneer, powerful one, hedonist, and pensive one constantly reappear and even intersect among the 7 generations of the family. Understanding a key concept of this novel is repetition. This notion of repetition can be observed in the names of the family members. Many readers of 100 Years of Solitude are perplexed by the difficulty of keeping track of who is who and their relationships. The names in the book are often long when given in full, such as the family's first-generation patriarch, José Arcadio Buendía. Furthermore, many names recur, despite belonging to different individuals of different generations. This is because the family selects names for their descendants based on the names of their elders. This is also why I tried to avoid mentioning names earlier. However, you don't need to worry about this matter. In earlier versions of 100 Years of Solitude, even the author himself became confused and mixed up the generational relationships between characters. Therefore, you don't need to make a conscious effort to remember the following names. Among all the names in the family, 3 appear most frequently: Arcadio, Aureliano, and Remedios. These 3 names also represent distinct characteristics of the characters. Anyone named Arcadio possesses an extroverted personality, often impulsive and robust, acting without considering the consequences, and inclined towards hedonism. Those named Aureliano are introverted, inclined towards contemplation, enjoying solitude, and often exhibit traits of the pensive one, prone to melancholy. Those named Remedios are exceptionally beautiful women. Names represent destiny. On one hand, they symbolize the fate of the individuals bearing those names, and on the other hand, they represent the progression of the entire family through repetition. As stated in the book, the history of this family is nothing but a series of irrevocable repetitions, and if the axle were not inevitably worn, the wheel would never stop turning. The characters in the book are aware of this pattern and often subconsciously resist their predetermined roles. For example, the 4th generation includes a pair of twins, the hedonist and his brother, whose names are indeed Arcadio and Aureliano. When they were young, these two would deliberately mimic each other, such as imitating one another while eating, creating the illusion of one person eating in front of a mirror. They would also play pranks by swapping identities to tease their elders. Later, it was suspected that during these identity swaps, even they themselves couldn't tell if they were Arcadio or Aureliano. One piece of evidence was that Arcadio became increasingly melancholic while Aureliano grew livelier. It was clear that they had become confused. Alternatively, they intentionally sought to break free from the constraints their names imposed on their destinies. Another example is a woman from the 5th generation of the family who left Macondo to study in Europe. She once mentioned her family to her then fiancé. She loved Macondo and wanted to spend her life there with her husband. However, the children they had should never be named Aureliano or Arcadio, and their daughters should never be named Remedios. She also wanted to break free from the cyclical fate of the family. However, she couldn't escape the predestined fate. Upon returning to Macondo, she fell in love with a member of the family named Aureliano, who happened to be the pensive one. They gave birth to the last member of the family, a child with a pig's tail. 2 other key themes to understand in this novel are power and love. Power and love are eternal themes in Gabriel García Márquez's works. He excels at portraying how power and love can transform individuals. People can become obsessed with love and power, and the consequences are staggering. The lengthy 7-generation history in 100 Years of Solitude is essentially a continuous repetition of power and love. Power here sometimes refers to direct military power, as seen in the case of the powerful colonel. Other times, it represents the internal power of the family patriarch. Power creates the powerful, the colonels, and the little dictators. Love here sometimes represents the pursuit of love in a classical sense, while at other times it manifests as the fulfillment of desire. It gives rise to hedonists, and leads the pensive one to his demise. These themes reverberate and repeat until the family's fate reaches its end. Summary: firstly, 100 Years of Solitude made Gabriel García Márquez one of the most renowned writers in the world and brought him prestige as a Nobel laureate. Secondly, the novel tells the story of a family's 7-generation history, from colonization to extinction, in a place called Macondo. I have connected the rise and fall of this family using 4 characters: the pioneer, the powerful one, the hedonist, and the pensive one. Lastly, I have provided 3 keywords to understand this book: repetition, power, and love. Márquez has a penchant for depicting the transformation of individuals through power and love. These 2 themes run through 100 Years of Solitude. Within the family's 7 generations, there is an unchanging pattern of repetition. However, this repetition is also an enduring response of human nature to power and love. This is why critics say that Márquez is not merely telling the story of a particular people but the story of all humanity. Well, that concludes the content for this episode. If you enjoyed my video, please click like, subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends. Thank you.